The minute the lawsuit dropped, everything exploded. A full-blown $1 million legal bomb, paired with a lifetime ban from TLC, hit the headlines and not through any official statement. It leaked. One moment, Andre and Elizabeth were longtime staples of 90 Day Fiancé. The next, their names were missing from lineups, teaser trailers, and future deals. It was bigger than a breakup with the franchise. This was a takedown. Fans were shocked, but they weren't alone. TLC staff scrambled behind the scenes. Showrunners got flooded with calls from reporters before internal memos even circulated. Lawsuit PDFs were bouncing in Reddit threads while social media exploded with theories. Did Andre punch someone? Did Elizabeth quit mid-season? What had they done to deserve TLC's harshest punishment yet? But what triggered this total collapse wasn't one fight. It wasn't even one season. It was everything they thought they'd hidden finally leaking out. Hey, I'm Olivia, and you're watching Reality Sport, where we track the truth behind reality TV. If you're already in shock, trust me, you're not alone. Hit that subscribe if you live for the mess behind the scenes. And drop me a comment. Did you see this coming? Or were you blindsided like the rest of us? Now here's the wild part. The red flags weren't sudden. They were documented. Quietly. Over years. See, this scandal didn't start with an argument or a bad episode. It started with a file. A real file. Not a storyline. Not speculation. A paper trail of warnings, complaints, and chaos. TLC producers had been secretly keeping tabs on Andre and Elizabeth for years. And when the moment came, all that documentation was ready, neatly categorized, to end their time on the network permanently. They called it the Castravet's file. Internally, no one was supposed to talk about it. Staff weren't even allowed to acknowledge it existed. But almost every long-term producer had heard whispers. A growing archive of messy moments, bad behavior, on-set outbursts, and incidents so disruptive, they reportedly cost the network thousands. Why hide it? Because the chaos brought views. Andre's outbursts weren't bugs. They were rated as features. That tension with Elizabeth's family kept dragging in millions of eyeballs. Their volatility turned into memes. Their on-screen drama kept fans invested across multiple seasons. But behind those viral clips, real people were taking notes. Literal paragraph-long records were being added to an internal log every time something derailed a scene or broke protocol. No, TLC didn't snap overnight. They simmered, quietly, for years, hoping possibly the situation would cool down. But it didn't. It got worse, louder, riskier, and eventually impossible to manage. Producers started burning out. Crew began requesting reassignment. Some refused to work with the couple altogether. And finally, the costs, emotional and financial, tipped everything over the edge. Now here's where it gets spine-chilling. For the couple, everything was business as usual. Until it wasn't. The lawsuit hit before they even had time to process what was happening. According to sources, Andre found out through social media. Elizabeth through a panic text. The network hadn't even picked up the phone because by the time the legal filing was finalized, TLC had one goal: shut the door completely. Fast. Without negotiation. And with receipts to back it up. The real question now isn't how this ended. It's why TLC tolerated it for so long, and what exactly was in those buried files that finally made them snap. When Andre first arrived on 90 Day Fiancé, fans thought he was controlling. That wasn't just a storyline, it was the tone from the very first episode. The way he barked orders at Elizabeth, clashed with her family, and acted like he was above compromise, it was all intense. But what the audience didn't see, that intensity didn't turn off when the cameras cut. Even in season 1, producers flagged issues behind the scenes. According to crew insiders, Andre's attitude wasn't limited to castmates. He pushed back on scheduling, questioned production decisions, and sometimes flat out refused direction, One junior field producer allegedly complained that Andre treated them like a personal assistant, not production. That wasn't a one-time comment. It became part of a pattern. Still, TLC moved forward. Andre's temper made good television. His culture clashes with Elizabeth's outspoken family were ratings gold. And Elizabeth herself? At first, she played the role of balance. When cameras rolled, she was the bridge between worlds, softening Andre's edges, smoothing out scenes, explaining away his bluntness as Eastern European bluntness or stress. Crew described her as pleasant, easy to work with, and often the reason certain scenes didn't spiral into disaster. But even then, cracks were forming. From early on, insiders said team members were documenting red flag moments, quietly. These weren't dramatic incidents at first, more like under-the-radar clashes that slowed filming down. A production assistant told someone not affiliated with the case that it often felt like walking on eggshells. That nothing was ever easy with Andre, no matter how small the request. Something as basic as signing a waiver could end in a 20-minute argument about rights and phrasing. Multiply that by an entire season. One former camera operator claimed they were specifically instructed to shoot around Andre's behind-the-scenes moods when he wasn't cooperating on interviews. At the time, it felt like a quirk, not sabotage. Now, in hindsight, those moods were early red flags. But perhaps the most telling part? Even back then, there were whispers of a file. Long before the lawsuit, long before the network fallout, producers had started noting down repeated issues. One editor said you could almost feel which scenes had backstage tension. The footage might be smooth, but the call sheets told a different story. Delays, absences, rewrites mid-shoot. If fans were shocked on camera, imagine what producers dealt with off it. At this early phase, Elizabeth still seemed fully on board with production. She showed up, hit her marks, wore the mic, and played her part. Even when Andre's confrontations escalated, she tried to downplay it. The couple's chemistry, volatile, yes, was at least working for the narrative. But change was coming. By the time they returned for another season, the energy around their storyline had shifted. Insiders recall more frequent complaints. Arguments that didn't start as typical reality TV posturing, but bled into real logistical headaches. Scheduling around their marital tensions became increasingly difficult, and the tipping point wasn't screaming matches or walk-offs. It was what wasn't being said, quiet refusals, skipped shoots, or repeated rejection of creative direction. Something had shifted behind Elizabeth's smile. She wasn't just defending Andre on screen. She was now defending him behind the scenes too, with production. By season 3, the shift had fully landed. Issues that once were whispered about became formal. Some producers stopped verbally logging the problems and began putting it all in writing. Things moved from problematic to documented. But the growing mystery inside TLC wasn't just what was happening, it was who was keeping track. Because if there was a file, who was building it? And why did they keep it secret for so long? The file started small. A messy exchange here, a production delay there. Just a few scribbled notes about Andre refusing to cooperate on interviews or pushing back on call times. Most cast members rack up minor complaints like that over a few seasons. But Andre's file didn't stay minor. It grew. Fast. Quietly. And dangerously. Internally, TLC never called it anything official. But among longtime staff and shoot coordinators, it had a name. The Castravet file. It wasn't on a single hard drive. Pieces of it lived in field reports, email threads, incident logs spread across departments, legal, HR, production. But together, those separate pieces formed a full picture of escalating chaos. Things hit a new level during a shoot in Northern Virginia. According to 2 former crew members, it began with a normal shoot at a hotel. But when Andre allegedly didn't like how a discussion was being framed on camera, he demanded the crew shut down filming immediately. The supervising producer, caught off guard, tried to de-escalate. Instead, tensions exploded into a shouting match in the hallway. Not just in front of production, but witnessed by hotel guests, and reportedly, a security guard who had to step in to separate them. There was no physical altercation, but sources say the incident was serious enough that TLC documented it as an official work disruption. Legal reviewed it. The file grew by 5 pages overnight. After that, the vibe around the couple changed from dramatic to dangerous. Andre didn't adapt. He doubled down. Any form of authority, scheduling, legal paperwork, story outlining was now a trigger. Several field producers said he would argue scenes were set up to make him look bad. One insider claimed he accused crew of being biased anytime they edited an interaction he didn't like. That same source said shoot schedules became entire risk assessments every time Andre was involved. He began clashing over everything: lighting, logistics, location access. In one shoot, Andre reportedly refused to leave his hotel room simply because the scene didn't fit his mood. Over time, the team stopped trying to fix it. They just documented it. Crew stopped hoping for smooth days and just clicked record before things unraveled. All those moments, cut clips, failed interviews, flare-ups that never aired, were quietly gathered into internal reports that ended up feeding the monster that was now known to insiders simply as the file. Leaked memos would later show that at least 3 separate incident reviews were conducted before the lawsuit ever existed. By the last full season Andre appeared on, multiple production assistants had been rotated out. One senior crew member is quoted anonymously saying, "You couldn't guarantee a peaceful day once Andre stepped on set." One producer said they couldn't guarantee a peaceful day once Andre stepped on set. That's not a comment you hear in a healthy work environment. That's a workplace walking the edge every day. But even with things spiraling, the show kept rolling. Why? Because conflict sells. Except this time, it wasn't just Andre being caught in the tension. Something had shifted in Elizabeth. She used to step in to calm him down. Now, she was choosing sides. And the side she picked wasn't production. It wasn't just Andre anymore. Elizabeth was starting to change too. And it made everything worse that for a while, Elizabeth was the bandage over every Andre blow-up. If he barked at producers, she smoothed it over. If he refused to cooperate, she'd charm her way into getting him back on script. Crew quietly respected her. But that changed. And when it did, things got harder faster than anyone expected. Season after season, after all the tension and verbal clashes, something in her shifted. Elizabeth, who once played the relatable one, TLC's golden girl who could keep the mess in check, started walking into scenes already on edge. Multiple crew members who worked across different cycles noticed it. She wasn't just supporting Andre emotionally. Now she was backing him in arguments. One field producer recalled requesting a simple retake after audio interference, only to have Elizabeth push back. Hard. Not because the request was wrong, but because she claimed they were being controlled again. That word stuck. Again, the same behavior producers used to attribute only to Andre started showing up in Elizabeth too. And when both halves of a lead couple start questioning direction, refusing scenes, and pushing changes, that stops being a bad day. That becomes a pattern. Behind the scenes, staff said the shift from buffer to blocker was slow but clear. One production assistant explained it like this. First, she'd roll her eyes and go along with Andre. Then, she'd push for him to get more respect. By the end, she was initiating whole debates about production decisions herself. The result? Delays. constant ones. Locations lost daylight because arguments dragged too long. Dialogues felt recycled or unusable because energy was off. One editor complained in an off-the-record message that there were too many scenes with hostile silence no one could cut around. Every hour wasted added to the already growing cost of controlling them on set. It got so bad that during post-production, entire days of footage were tossed out. Whole arcs were reshaped in the edit room just to make anything usable. Editors reportedly begged for formal logs to understand why every third scene ended in tension they couldn't explain with the footage they had. That's when the showrunner, once vocally supportive of keeping Andre and Libby front and center, finally snapped. Someone who had previously praised their dramatic value formally pulled back. Not publicly, but internally? That's when TLC started considering contingency plans. And when your own champion at the top taps out, that's not a good sign. This wasn't a couple unraveling. It was a power duo pushing the network to its limit. Yet even then, cameras kept rolling. Maybe out of habit, maybe out of denial. Or playing gravity. When a show's that big, nobody wants to pull the plug first. Andre and Elizabeth had been stitched into the franchise fabric. Untangling them meant rewriting everything. So the show went to Florida. A new shoot. Fresh environment. Producers hoped for a reset. What they got instead was the boiling point. Still, TLC kept rolling the cameras until one shoot in Florida changed everything. Florida was supposed to be the change of pace everyone needed. A polished location, simple logistics, a lighter episode arc. From the outside, everything looked routine. Andre and Elizabeth were scheduled for a few domestic scenes with minimal crew, just sit-downs and slice-of-life content. But halfway into the day, the tone flipped. And this time, it didn't flip back. According to 3 separate insiders, the shoot derailed over a small disagreement. Something about framing a scene where Andre had to address his ongoing tension with Elizabeth's family. It wasn't even a surprise narrative. But allegedly, Andre refused to go along with the version of events production wanted to highlight. It escalated instead into a confrontation during equipment setup. One producer, with over 8 seasons under their belt, later told someone close to the situation that nobody raised their voice except him. No one even had the chance. What followed wasn't a shouting match, but something more unnerving. The vibe reportedly shifted so drastically that 2 crew members walked off set, citing safety and emotional stress. That crossed the line. An on-call supervisor was pulled in. The shoot shut down midday. Hotels had already been paid, local vendors were booked, security was clocked in. The call sheet for the next 48 hours was scrapped. And with that kind of chain reaction, so is budget. One incomplete filming day pushed production losses well into 5 figures. In isolation, that kind of hiccup might not seem like the end of the world. But this wasn't the first shutdown. It wasn't even the second. Insiders say that during this final filming cycle, multiple scenes were canceled last minute due to unpredictable blow-ups. Scheduling became near impossible. Location contracts were being renegotiated daily. The rest of the season's logistics had to be reshuffled because of one storyline. Some crew began asking to be reassigned. Certain departments went quiet anytime the Castravets came up. If an episode centered them, expectations were low. No one said it directly, but in internal circles, the term started slipping into emails and meeting notes, liability. That word hits different in TV. Once talent is labeled unpredictable, costly, or unsafe, and once those feelings are backed by paperwork, you're not seen as valuable. You're seen as a legal problem. And once a star becomes a liability, networks move fast, especially when lawyers get involved. Legal didn't swoop in for drama. They came in because records of shutdowns, emotional complaints, scheduling losses, and stress-related crew fallout had simply gotten too big to ignore. Leadership couldn't pretend anymore. Not after the Florida episode. Not when footage cost more than it delivered. That's when the network took real action. Which brings us to the internal legal audit. The moment the network decided enough was enough. Inside TLC, the tone shifted overnight. It wasn't panic yet, but something heavier settled in after Florida. Executives who used to brush off producer complaints now called private meetings. HR, legal, and production heads were looped into a newly formed internal review panel. This wasn't a PR meeting. This was a liability containment effort. For the first time, department leaders were told to pull all records involving Andre and Elizabeth going back to their earliest seasons. That meant crew reports, location complaints, internal emails, debrief summaries, everything. Different teams had pieces of the puzzle, but no one had ever seen the full picture all in one place. What they found wasn't a couple having occasional meltdowns. It was a years-long paper trail of disruption, anger, manipulation, and stress. Notes detailing crew members being verbally cornered during B-roll setups. Complaints from field producers alleging they didn't feel safe enforcing basic procedures. Emotional distress logs from camera techs who requested time off directly related to episodes involving the Castravets. One coordinator described having a physical breakdown in a hotel hallway after a 12-hour shoot fell apart due to what they called exhausting power struggles with the couple. A post-production editor submitted a quiet formal request to be reassigned after spending a week cutting unusable scenes where the cast refused direction or ignored story beats. The internal keyword that kept popping up? Exhaustion. Not from the workload. From the emotional drain of working with talent who, over time, stopped treating the crew like people and started seeing the entire set as something to battle. This wasn't about a single confrontation in a hallway or one bad day on set. The legal team began connecting the dots between crew turnover, lost production hours, and the constantly rising cost of shielding those moments from the public. The language in these documents was different too. Less vague, more direct. You could feel the guard dropping. People who used to self-edit began writing honestly once the panel promised confidentiality. The mental and emotional impact of working under such conditions was laid bare, along with the costs TLC had chosen to accept in exchange for spicy episodes and strong social media engagement. In private rooms, executives whispered what no one had dared say before out loud. What if we'd been protecting the wrong people? What if the real loyalty should have been to the staff who broke themselves to keep this couple camera ready? These weren't isolated events. They were symptoms of a show cracking from the inside. It was obvious now. The couple wasn't just difficult. Their behavior had quietly reshaped working conditions for scores of staffers whose voices were buried beneath ratings and contracts. And then, just as the panel prepared to act quietly, one document slipped out. An internal note, simple and short, a reference to rising production instability tied directly to Andre. It had no identifying names or personal information, but its formatting was unmistakable. It was real. TLC thought they had time to prepare, but they weren't the only ones watching. But before TLC could even act officially, someone on the inside leaked the first document. And then came the flood. The first leak was small. A redacted screenshot of an internal memo buried inside a Reddit thread no one took seriously at first. A couple lines about production instability centered around a talent name too blurry to read. But within an hour, a few sharp-eyed ex-crew members confirmed it. The terminology, the formatting, the phrasing. It was TLC language, and once they knew what it was, they knew more of it would surface. Within 48 hours, another leak appeared. This time, sharper. It came from someone familiar with the inner log files, a complaint citing emotional burnout, and a direct interaction with Andre that left a producer shaken. There were no expletives or threats in the language, but what hit harder was the cold matter-of-fact tone that a working adult no longer felt capable of doing their job under those conditions. That line landed on social media with a thud. Suddenly, phones started buzzing at TLC. Journalists began digging, wanting comment. Gossip accounts turned speculative posts into sliding DMs. Was the Castravets' absence from promos really a creative direction? Or had something deeper gone down? Internally, everything froze. Directors were briefed. Access to archived footage was restricted. Full server activity was reviewed to see who might have had clearance to circulate internal communication links outside the network. Emergency calls started happening at night. Lockouts were initiated on freelance cloud editing systems. Several former contractors who'd worked with the Castravets over prior seasons were sent updated non-disclosure reminders. Everyone who had touched the couple's storyline, every editor, coordinator, and department assistant was told not to comment to anyone, for any reason. Still, it was too late. The leaks were gaining momentum. And not all came from inside. A former field assistant, now working in entertainment PR, reportedly handed over a detailed account of a long-forgotten incident on set, one that had never aired, never been mentioned publicly, but was word-for-word consistent with what one of the internal complaints had said. That's when TLC accepted reality. The wall had cracked. The paper trail they'd tried to keep quiet for so long now had heat beneath it. Enough that outside voices could begin verifying it without needing direct visual proof. The highest levels of the network met behind closed doors. Legal carves protection. Comms writes emergency talking points no one really plans to use. Some on the business side are still trying to salvage advertiser trust. One executive reportedly couldn't believe it had gotten this far without anyone acting sooner. Another ordered a private scan of all unmarked issue memos originating from the field that might have slipped below the initial radar. Because if pieces of internal reporting were leaking now, more were coming. It wasn't a question of stopping them. It was a matter of bracing for impact. The dam had broken, and the receipts wouldn't stop pouring in. But the moment that pushed everything over, even more than the documents, wasn't typed. It was recorded. Quietly. Unexpectedly. A confrontation that no one planned to share until someone, somewhere, did. And then came the final straw. A senior producer confronted Andre, and someone recorded it. The recording didn't start with yelling. That's what made it worse. The audio began slow, calculated, Andre pushing back against the senior producer, the kind of behind-the-scenes heavyweight who usually keeps their cool no matter what. You hear Andre interrupt, deny, accuse. Then the tone tightens. The producer tries to restate expectations. Andre allegedly cuts them off again. The clip, short and raw, ends with chair movement and raised voices, reportedly off-script, off-track, and off the safety rails. No one on the outside was supposed to hear it. But it didn't stay inside. Once the audio leaked, TLC's legal team dropped everything. It wasn't just about tone or content. The clip matched written complaints submitted months earlier, word for word. It was, in their eyes, confirmation that the damage wasn't exaggerated. It was on tape. The lawsuit was pulled forward. No more holding pattern. They fast-tracked every filing, every review, and official decisions were made within days, not weeks. But inside the network, things weren't exactly united. The legal team wanted to go hard immediately. File, distance, protect the brand. But PR saw the firestorm building online and wanted time to get ahead of the narrative. There were still upcoming franchise events, spin-offs in development, and overseas licensing arrangements. A lawsuit this loud would blow through them. Branding meetings grew tense. One executive reportedly asked whether Andre could be quietly bought out of remaining appearances without escalation. Another pushed for complete removal and legal follow-through, no matter the backlash. On multiple calls, two department heads didn't speak directly at all. TLC, the same channel that built its ratings on slow-burn family conflict, was now falling into its own version of it. Internal alliances were splitting. Staffers who had worked with Elizabeth were shocked by how far things had escalated. Others said they'd sounded alarms years earlier and were frustrated it took this long to act. Amid all of it, the lawsuit was finalized, with everything included: breach of contract, disruption of production, risk to staff. The price tag wasn't symbolic. It came with numbers, estimates of lost footage days, canceled locations, staff overtime, and forced cancellations. The number hit $1 million. Not because anyone expected to get it, but because they needed the message on public record. This wasn't drama. This was loss. And while TLC scrambled to reframe future press around spinoffs, the couple at the center of it hadn't even gotten the official word yet. The couple was out of the loop until the lawsuit leaked before the email even reached them. Phones blew up. Elizabeth's name started trending for all the wrong reasons. Andre reportedly found out midday through a fan DM and screenshots. Journalists started calling before their lawyers did. The news landed not with outrage, but with confusion and fury. Their reaction? Explosive. But according to insiders, that was only the beginning of their downfall. The moment the story broke wasn't the end for Andre and Elizabeth. It was ignition. According to sources close to the couple, the lawsuit hit like betrayal. Elizabeth, who'd considered some of the staff her friends, didn't just cry. She reportedly broke down when she saw her name in one of the internal memos. Not Andre's. Hers. That detail stung worse than the dollar signs. In her mind, she had supported production, played along with creative direction, even protected crew on multiple occasions. In private, she kept asking, why didn't they say anything to me? But by then, the answer was clear. They had. Quietly. Over years. Through notes, withdrawn schedules, and behind-the-scenes tension that had, brick by brick, built the wall the lawsuit was now crashing through. Andre, on the other hand, skipped disbelief. He went straight to rage. According to insiders familiar with his reaction, he didn't view the lawsuit as disciplinary. He saw it as revenge. He allegedly told a contact that TLC knew what they were getting into when they kept renewing contracts, that they wanted the mess, that they created the pressure cooker, then blamed him when it boiled over. Almost immediately, they contacted legal representation. Not to apologize, to fight. Their lawyers issued a controlled pushback that highlighted bias, selective enforcement, and what they described as years of intentional character manipulation by producers. They pointed out that much of the show revolved around characters who were volatile, emotional, or combative. Why, they asked, was Andre being punished for playing into the same narrative structure that made TLC millions? They also questioned the leaks. Who had access? Who released internal documents before official legal action could begin? If TLC's systems weren't secure, how could the chain of events be trusted? But while the couple went defensive publicly, something else was happening privately. Something far harder for them to control. For every lawyered-up counter-argument their team pushed, another story bubbled up from someone who'd worked with them, filmed them, or managed them in the field. Suddenly, managers who'd stayed silent across multiple seasons were reaching out to reporters, not for payment or fame, but to be heard. To say me too. One described being caught between Andre's mood swings and Elizabeth's polite deflections for so long, they no longer knew which version of them was real. Another recalled being humiliated in front of extras during a group shoot when the couple allegedly ignored instructions and then blamed production for the confusion. Others weren't explosive stories, but they carried weight. A coordinator said she skipped out on shooting the couple 1 year because she'd aged 5 years in one season under their storyline. A cameraman remembered being yelled at because Andre didn't like the angle of a shot that was dictated by lighting, not preference. Still, this wasn't a one-sided avalanche. There were counterpoints. A handful of crew members, mostly freelancers who'd passed through for limited-time shoots, spoke out in defense of the couple. Some claimed Andre was no worse than other dramatic cast members pushed toward conflict by producers thirsty for raw footage. One editor noted that Elizabeth, even during high-tension days, hit her marks and tried to stay cooperative when cameras rolled. In their view, TLC pushed couples to the emotional edge on purpose, then edited the fallout for maximum engagement. The reaction was mixed. Some supported these critiques, others saw them as distraction tactics. But regardless of where people landed, the effect was undeniable. Everything Andre and Elizabeth said was now being met with cross-reference receipts. Suddenly, everyone had a story, and not all of them painted the couple as victims. And still, the stories kept layering. Crew who had left TLC years earlier started sharing their unread exit interviews. One former producer released a now-verified message sent to a supervisor, warning that continuing the couple's storyline was becoming an untreated wound, reopening each shoot cycle. There were also whispers that other couples had refused joint appearances with them at tell-all reunions, not because of personal beef, but because of the energy they brought to set. Interviews followed, some anonymous, others more direct. A former associate producer alleged that Andre tried to rewrite reality during scenes, demanding reshoots anytime the footage made him look human or vulnerable. Another clip surfaced, a blooper, allegedly unaired, where Elizabeth seemed to argue off-camera about lighting, pacing, and mic placement. Nothing accusatory, but real, raw in a way that clashed with the on-screen persona she had sustained for years. Then came the claims from within the editing bay. Sources said they were often told to cut around behaviors that made the couple look too intentionally aggressive. According to two post-production editors, several scenes had to be removed, not because of legal concerns, but because they created an atmosphere of outright hostility that clashed with the network's tone. TLC wasn't aiming for Bravo-level warfare, but with Andre and Elizabeth, the conflict reportedly stopped feeling entertaining and started feeling dangerous. And yet, there were still defenders circling the couple. Fans online argued they were being set up, that TLC had used them until they no longer fit a commercial mold, then tossed them aside. Others pointed out other stars with worse public behavior who had remained employed. One comment summed it up bluntly. So, this is about disruption now? Not about abuse or crossing legal lines? Sounds like a cleanup for the brand. It was a fair point, and it gained traction. Journalists began asking what TLC knew, and when. Why keep filming if the situation had become so toxic? Why invest in multiple spin-off appearances across seasons? Why not intervene earlier? This wasn't just drama anymore. It was a credibility issue for the network. At the center of it all, Andre and Elizabeth fired back through their reps, blaming bad editing, miscommunication, and selective storytelling. But they stopped short of directly naming any crew or accusing individuals. Probably on legal advice, maybe out of personal restraint. Still, their anger was obvious. A source close to them said Andre wanted to go public with screenshots, voice memos, everything. But his team advised against it. Even Elizabeth, shaken and exhausted, reportedly confided to someone close that she wished they had walked away from the show earlier. That she didn't know how they'd become the bad guys in a narrative they once led. And outside their circle, more names kept resurfacing. Producers, camera crew, even former friends, all started coming forward. But not everyone hates them. Not everyone who'd worked with Andre and Elizabeth was out for blood. As the scandal grew louder, a surprising number of former crew members and one-time employees started quietly defending the couple, not with fan-style loyalty, but with something more nuanced. They didn't deny trouble. They acknowledged it, but they also pointed fingers back at TLC. One production veteran, speaking under anonymity, said the show had a habit of picking at pressure points and calling it story development. They claimed Andre wasn't unpredictable from the start. He was reactive. Emotional? Sure. Rash? No doubt. But also provoked on purpose. They described a system where producers poked at family tensions, orchestrated accidental time crunches, and encouraged cast members to speak more freely in confessionals right after emotionally high-pressure moments. We didn't want Andre to explode, the source said, but we absolutely knew what would get him close. That's where the conversation turned. Was this all the couple's fault? Or did the network take advantage of Andre's short fuse, collect the viral clips, rinse the ratings, and toss him aside once things crossed a legal threshold? The questions started showing up everywhere. Culture writers picked up the story, not as another messy TLC scandal, but as a case of blurred lines between drama and exploitation. Think pieces emerged about whether reality TV had entered its breaking point, treating cast members like chaos pipelines to be mined until the footage turned into lawsuits. Fans argued over comment sections across Reddit, YouTube, and TikTok. Some still defended Andre outright. Others didn't absolve him, but said TLC had long ignored its own pattern of encouraging conflict until it backfired. There were screenshots from former cast member interviews where they hinted at being coached into fights or fed information off-screen to stir reactions. None of that negated bad behavior, but it reframed it. Elizabeth's portrayal came under reassessment too. Was she an equal aggressor or someone stuck defending a man she felt the network had constantly vilified? Or, some suggested, was she a willing strategist, leaning into the mess for more screen time until the monster they co-authored turned around and bit them? No angle gave a clean answer. As insiders tried to protect their reputations, many started redirecting heat toward TLC itself. One crew member compared the production environment to a pressure cooker with broken dials. Every cast member has a line, they said. They push till you hit it, then act shocked when it boils over. The worst allegations weren't simplicity. They were wear-down tactics, segment producers pushing a known personal trigger 2 or 3 times during pre-interviews. Coordinators withholding full information from cast to drive authentic reactions on camera. Emotional fatigue was intentionally cultivated. It made for messier moments. That's what reality TV needs. But when those same raw emotions caused set delays, crew burnout, and public backlash, the responsibility blurred. And that's exactly where TLC slipped into view. Not as a clean victim reacting responsibly, but as a studio sitting in the flames of its own design, surprised at how hot it got. All of this added complexity to what should have been a clear-cut scandal. Suddenly, fans started asking things out loud. Why shoot another season if Andre and Elizabeth were this hard to work with? Why wait until leaks to pull the plug? Why file a $1 million lawsuit when you could have ended their contract quietly years ago? Whether calculated or not, the evidence trail began implicating the system as much as its stars. Emails between network departments, notes ignored, reports that were read, then flagged, then set aside. They were all there. And they all suggested that if TLC didn't know what was happening, it absolutely should have. This wasn't black and white anymore, and TLC's own record was under fire. The most damning realization wasn't that the couple lost control. It was that no one else ever had it either. Management looked the other way when ratings were good. Crew endured until they couldn't. And now, with everything laid out in public, both sides were tied to the fallout. By now, fans weren't debating if Andre and Elizabeth caused problems. They had. Repeatedly. But did the network let things spiral because chaos made money? That was the harder truth to sit with. Social media debates turned thoughtful, then tense again. Some fans still aligned with the couple, saying they were scapegoats. Others pointed out there were boundaries. Even reality TV has lines. What mattered wasn't whether they were provoked, but how they responded. And respond they did. Loudly. Often. And in ways that, documented over time, became impossible to defend. But again, so did TLC's silence. In the end, loyalty didn't fall neatly along fanverse network lines. Some viewers blamed everyone. Others blamed no one individually, seeing only a broken system where conflict was a commodity and accountability came too late. One thing was clear. Andre and Elizabeth were no longer simply characters on a show. They were case studies in how far reality TV is willing, or unwilling, to go for content. There was no satisfying ending, just the pieces of a fractured franchise caught in the middle of its own boiling point, waiting for the next wave. So, if everyone's guilty, what happens to the story now? Once the lawsuit filed and the leak slowed, for a moment, it might have seemed like things had gone quiet. But inside TLC, silence didn't mean calm. It meant containment. Damage control meetings stretched late into the night. Internal calls grew longer, more cautious, and noticeably devoid of names. No one wanted to admit what everyone already believed. The network saw this coming, but waited too long to act. Internally, change began almost immediately, if quietly. First came a rework of production policies, starting with hiring. Field producers now required extra compliance training before going out on storyline-heavy shoots. New forms were introduced to track crew well-being during production cycles, quietly disguised as logistical wellness check-ins. And there was a rule, whispered among teams, but never printed anywhere official. No more Castravet-style volatility on the call sheet. Then came the strengthening of NDAs. Old contracts were reviewed. New ones were tightened. Access to personal cast footage was restricted to fewer editors with locked systems. Format shifts began from the inside out. Every returning showrunner had to re-watch raw footage from prior seasons, not to mine content, but to preempt anything that felt too close to the edge. An overhaul of the incident reporting structure also rolled out. In the past, field complaints were scattered, sent to HR, emailed to supervisors, sometimes never followed up on. Now they'd be funneled electronically, stored on a flagged server reserved for internal investigations. They weren't called files anymore. But everyone knew what they were meant to prevent. Another Castravet situation. Behind the scenes, reshuffling quietly began. A few department heads were reassigned. Longtime production managers who had greenlit earlier storylines were rotated away from shows with high confessional conflict. One executive went on temporary leave, officially for unrelated reasons. But those in the building knew better. Reassignments like those never happen without a deeper reason. There was also a change in the kind of cast being pursued. Storylines for upcoming seasons subtly shifted. Less chaos, more relatable. Fewer external fights, and more internal tension. TLC had no interest in another brand crisis. Not after losing weeks of future content, millions in ad value, and public trust tied to a couple who nobody dared question until it was way too late. And this cleanup wasn't just a reaction. It was a warning to the entire franchise. Don't cause trouble. Don't disrupt structure. Don't pull another Andre. No one said this out loud. It lived between the lines. In choice of talent. In editing feedback. In the new reminders to avoid emotional escalation prompts during interviews. The show might still sell chaos, but now it would come with disclaimers. Through all of this, TLC refused to officially comment on the couple or the lawsuit. No press release. No interview. It was radio silence. But in industry calls, a new tone had clearly been adopted. No tolerance for long-term internal disruption. And with that came closures. Some departments that had once spent all their time managing the Castravet shoots were dissolved, absorbed into new projects, or replaced by smaller ops teams built for quicker pivots and tighter oversight. Still, not everyone inside TLC was happy with the fallout. Several producers who had worked with Andre and Elizabeth across seasons felt abandoned, left to manage that storyline for years with little support. Some accused upper leadership of sacrificing truth for ratings, others quietly resented the couple for making everything harder. But no one, it seemed, felt like walking away clean. The cleanup may have started, but the aftershocks revealed something deeper. Trust inside the building had cracked too. Behind the glam of reality TV, a reckoning was underway. The franchise had reached a boundary it was never supposed to cross. Not because the couple yelled or refused to play along, but because TLC saw the fire forming, decided it was still worth it, and underestimated just how fast heat can spread when you keep stacking flammable moments on top of each other. Now, they're trying to reset. New couples, new confessionals, a slow pivot away from the explosive in-laws and ego-driven standoffs that once defined 90 Day Fiancé's biggest hits. But long-time fans notice a shift. The newer seasons feel safer, more muted. Some love it. Others call it fake. Either way, the brand is evolving because it had to. And yet, the story isn't over. What TLC didn't expect. The Castravets still have a platform, social media, loyal followers, and, most importantly, screenshots. In a series of interviews and quietly controlled statements, Andre's legal team implied that they weren't done. That TLC would be forced to answer questions eventually about production tactics, about misleading representations, about whether the network egged on conflict behind the scenes, only to act shocked when it reached legal territory. Elizabeth, for her part, remained publicly quieter, but far more emotionally transparent in the few appearances she made. She didn't deny there were issues, but she also strongly hinted that the pressure to perform made those issues worse. Her message was layered, maybe even conflicted, but clear enough to spark speculation. They weren't retreating. They were regrouping. Whether or not their response gains traction is yet to be seen. What is certain, TLC wanted a clean break. But the Castravets weren't ready to go quietly. Not after years of unpaid overtime, emotional labor, and behind-the-scenes recordings they may or may not still be sitting on. Like all the best reality arcs, this one isn't ending with a lawsuit. That was just the mid-season twist, but the Castravets weren't finished talking. And part 2 of their battle might go even deeper than the first. For years, it looked like entertainment. Just another messy couple on a messy reality show. But underneath the dramatic edits and viral clips, a different story was brewing. One that had less to do with marriage and more to do with control, power, and silence. What happened with Andre and Elizabeth wasn't one bad season. It was the slow building result of years of unchecked tension, internal warnings, and a network willing to roll the dice because the chaos brought attention. Their fallout didn't come out of nowhere. It came from behind-the-scenes breakdowns that were quietly tolerated season after season, until finally, the damage spilled out so publicly that ignoring it became impossible. What started as explosive storylines, edited into memeable couple fights and villain arcs, eventually exposed a system that had no plan for what happens when conflict stops being entertaining and starts becoming a legal liability. When the dust finally settled, it was clear. The Castravets may have been the match, but TLC was the gasoline. The producers let the fire burn until it threatened their bottom line, and only then, after the leaks, after the recordings, after the emotional toll could no longer be brushed off, did the network pull out the extinguisher. By then, the damage was already smoking its way through headlines, industry inboxes, and legal offices. Viewers were left asking who they believed. Was Andre a casualty of a system that pushed his buttons until he snapped? Was Elizabeth truly complicit? Or simply exhausted? Could TLC really claim surprise when much of this had been written, memo by memo, for years? It's a mess without a clean villain, which is exactly what makes this story matter. Because behind every on-screen meltdown is a crew trying to hold the scaffolding up. Behind every shocking moment is a calculated risk. And sometimes, those risks explode. But if you think this is where the chaos ends, think again. Because Andre and Elizabeth may have been the messiest fallout we've seen. Public, expensive, and game-changing. But they weren't the only ones behind the scenes making producers sweat. And if you thought this was the worst fallout behind the scenes at TLC, wait until you hear what happened when another Stars off-camera meltdown nearly shut down production in an entirely different country. That one hasn't even hit headlines yet.